So with that, Carletta and children, the floor is yours.
Kamija, Nyasivio, Carletta Toulouse, Iksijka, Hanka, Wanyabam, Wakichma. Good morning, everyone. My name is Carletta Toulouse. I'm from the Havasupai tribe. I'm also a co-vice chair for the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Welcome to the White House. Today, I've been given the honor and the privilege to acknowledge the indigenous people that once roamed this area where we stand today. I'm very happy to be given that privilege because I too am a Havasupai woman that survived in an area that was once taken from us. Prior to European contact, many indigenous people roamed this area called what we now call Washington, D.C. and the Potomac rivers. They farmed here and lived here and sustained themselves here for many, many centuries. The tribes are the Noctok, the Anacostans, and the Piscataway Convoy people. We want to today take this time to ask their permission to be here on this land where they raised their families, sustained themselves through fishing and living here for many, many years prior to European contact. Many of the people have passed away from unfortunate diseases when the Europeans came here. Many died of war, but we are still here. And in our culture and in our way, we ask their permission to be here today because their spirit is still here. So I will ask that in my language. Vam banyabam gudda baj vam gnawabam bam hak bam uk bawam chkitja. Gagwen by spoja toya. Yuyit vok yam jakjim yam gwekayutka ijakima waktikavya. I ask their permission for us to be here today through my language. And thank you very much for all listening and taking this time to acknowledge the indigenous people that were physically once here. They are spiritually still here with us. And when you go to another place, you ask their permission to be here. And we look forward to this very important day to where we can all work together and learn from one another today on this historic Environmental Justice Day. Hamomba iya. Thank you.
Good morning, all. Do you want to go first?
Okay.
Jalan asked us to offer some remarks in lieu of the presence of Dr. Mildred McLean, who is caught up in one of those 800 cancellations from Delta Airlines and will not be able to join us. But we wanted to just bring some remarks and set some tone about the historic nature of this gathering. I'm looking at all these people in this room. I'm looking at Carletta and her 18 and 20-year-old children, and I've known her since she was 20 years old when we were working together at the First National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. Back then, we extended an invitation to the EPA administrator and did not hear back, and so I personally was mad until I got a chance to talk to him in May to say that we forgive him for not coming to the First National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. But just in greeting so many of you this morning, I look in your eyes and I think about how far we have come, how much work we have done, how much debt has been paid, how much blood has been spilled, how much pain has been suffered, right? This is not a conversation about environmental policy. This is a conversation about people's lives, right? And people's ability to survive, and as Mustafa would say, to thrive, right? To be able to be safe in the places where we live, to be able to work in safe working conditions, to live in places where we are safe and go to school in places where we are safe, to drink water that comes out of the tap or out of the well that does not poison us, right? And we have had a partnership with this administration that has been unprecedented. And I use that word all the time, and I need to come up with a new word because I've so overused it. But it really is unprecedented, is it not? Yes. Not just the resources, but my favorite thing that this administration has done recently, and Brenda, I have to lift you and CEQ up for inserting environmental justice in the revised National Environmental Policy Act. Thank you, Jesus, okay? We don't have to debate with anybody anymore. Where does EJ fit in the pantheon of environmental regulation and legislation? It's right there, right? It's in this section, it's in that section, and it's in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, right? So we've been throwing down on multiple fronts, and we have had the complete partnership of this administration in order to do that. You see the resources flowing. You see the programs rolling out. Carletta mentioned work with some of the indigenous nations, the Piscataway people who are based here in southern Prince George's County, where I live. They are engaged in a land back process in Accokeek, Maryland, in southern Prince George's County, getting their land back, right? Many tribal communities are getting that. Could you have imagined that 40 years ago when we began this conversation? Could you have imagined that? The recognition of what we've been through and what we've given to this country is reflected in this conversation that we're going to have today. I don't think there's enough time in the day for every federal agency to talk about everything that they're doing because they're doing so much. But I just want to say to our partners in federal service, while we may get on your nerves and you may get on ours, we have been on this journey together, but never so much as in these last 3.5 years. We see you. We see what you're doing. We see how you're fighting. We see how you're making space. We see you in the appropriations process. We see you, right? We see you in the rulemaking process. I get those emails from the Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards every freaking day about a new rule that lifts up and centers environmental justice, right? We see you fighting to defend and advance the Civil Rights Act, even though the avalanche of pressure is coming from the other direction. We see you, our partners, and we are honored to be here today, to be in this conversation with you. And Mustafa's going to talk about all the folks who made it possible for us to get here. But I just want to thank you all, thank our federal partners, thank our folks on the ground. And lastly, I want to say that I can't talk about the campaign, but I can say this. The former junior senator from California was the first Senate sponsor of the EJ for All Act. Remember that. Right? Remember that as we do the work that we're going to do over the next 105 days. And the work that we can do is to tell people about all the extraordinary things that have been happening. Tell people about the money that's being invested. Tell people about the changes in government policy. Tell people about the fight that's going on inside the federal government to elevate justice and equity. Tell people. Don't keep it in this room. Don't keep it among the people who normally are in the EJ conversation. Tell the people what's going on so they can stop asking the question, well, I don't know what this administration has been doing. I said, if I could just get them to pause for a minute so I can get some damn sleep. I can't sleep because they don't sleep. You know what I'm talking about. The work is never ending, right? And we have the opportunity to make it go further, but let's just acknowledge this moment that we're in. This is history making. This administration has been in advancing environmental justice. Mustafa Ali.
Thank you. It's good to see everyone. Good morning. Good morning. I was praying and meditating early this morning and asking ancestors to guide these words that I'm going to share with you as quickly as I can because they're showing me a sign that says I have 60 seconds. Damu Smith was one of my early mentors, and Damu used to say, when we mobilize, we win. When we fight, we win. Some folks are starting to use those words now. I want y'all to try it. When we mobilize, we win. I looked at this side because they got more rhythm. When we fight, we win. So I want to make sure that the energy is right. I'll get it done here in 1 minute and 30 seconds. I wrote this at 7 a.m. It's called Echoes of the Unseen. And each and every one of you are reflective of these folks that I'm going to call out. In the smoke of the sacrifice, where burnt promises mix with breath, Our stories are etched on forgotten walls. The soil remembers our names like a whispered prayer. We, the dust stirred and the silence beckoned, rose from the crumbling corners where asphalt dreams melted beneath the weight of industry's indifference. Hazel Johnson, whose hands cradled the poison beneath, a mother of the air we could barely breathe, her legacy sown in every hopeful sigh of children. Dana Alston, who danced with fury to the tune of toxic whispers, fighting shadows that only she could see, turning whispers to roars, erasing doubt with architecture. Damu Smith's voice, a river of fury and truth, cutting through the veil of bureaucratic fog, a beacon of those who still shiver in cancer's alleyways. Jean Gauna, a force of wild, untamed resilience, whose words gathered like storms to crash upon walls of apathy and cold steel. Jean Sindab, who understood that justice tastes of bitter roots and sweet freedom, whose toil was a rhythm, a heartbeat, drumming through the hollow chambers of broken promises. Bunyan Bryant's eyes held the entire sky of struggle, who turned the winds of dissent into a hurricane of change, stirring the forgotten and educating the next generation. Cecil Corbin Mark, irreplaceable architect, dedicated his life to dismantling the systemic chains that bound justice in shackles of inequality. Luke Cole, fearless sentinel, whose fight was etched in the grit of frontline struggles, championed the voices of those that clamor of neglect, a warrior for the lands and lives betrayed. Connie Tucker, whose fire blazed the Black Panther roots to green, brought the strength of revolution's pulse to the environmental struggle reshaping destinies. Wilma Mankiller, whose wisdom ensured our bond with Mother Nature endured, reminded us that justice is an earthbound oath, interwoven with the cycles of life and land. And the silent, unwavering torchbearers, those federal allies like Clarice Gaylord, whose voice stitched threads of solidarity through the jagged fabrics of systemic inertia. Willie Taylor, whose name is a promise, an oath, and unseen, will not falter, their shadows merging with the light of courage. Kim Lambert, whose pen and voice map the landscape of our rights and the ink of resistance fierce and clear. Bob Knox, a stalwart sentinel in the storm, his presence a quiet but unyielding force, a testament to the power and steadfast unity. Charles Lee, whose research and policy craft woven scientific rigor and advocacy, illuminating paths through the thickets of systemic neglect. Together, we were the whispers, now the roar, a symphony of resilience carved in the debris of neglect. Remember us not as ghosts in the fading corridor of struggle, but architects of tomorrow's dawn, a legion of voices unbroken and resolute. Tell our stories. Let me say that again. Tell our stories. Each breath of resistance, each step toward justice, so that the future can know that we did not just survive. We fought, we loved, we triumphed. Echoes of the unseen. Amen.
So you know when you call someone at 6 a.m. in the morning and they are able to put words together in a way that some folks could never dream of composing, you know that you have some special people. So Vernice and Mustafa, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you for bringing that into this room, into this space. Couldn't have done it better. I'm still trying to digest that. So, all right. Again, Carletta and children, Mustafa, Vernice, thank you for helping us set this tone. For the first time in history, we have a president and vice president, and I'm gonna say that again. For the first time in history, we have a president and a vice president who have made environmental justice a pillar in this administration. Thank you. Because you know we can't take that for granted. Right? Okay. They have laid out an environmental justice agenda that has set the course for the whole government not just one agency, the whole government, to confront and combat environmental injustices and inequities. They have backed that agenda up with dollars, resources, support. They have changed the White House and all of our federal partners to prioritize and operationalize environmental justice in all of our policies and practices and operations like never before. That is historical. So today's summit is a critical moment to reflect on, acknowledge, and celebrate the progress we have made in advancing this administration's environmental justice agenda. Knowing full well we have not made it to the promised land yet, but we are on our way. We are on our way. So again, in 1991, nearly 300 Black, Native, Latino, Pacific Islander, Asian American, and other activists gathered right here in DC to discuss the environmental injustices they were facing at the first National People of Color Environmental Summit. That summit brought together people embodying and celebrating self-determination and the leadership of communities of color. It redefined the meaning of environment. It's the place where we live, work, study, play, and pray. That summit was a watershed moment that changed the trajectory of the environmental justice movement. It's a blessing that we have some of the architects of that 1991 summit in this room with us today. If you were there, raise your hand so people know who you are. These voices led to the beginnings of EJ action within our federal government, including with President Clinton's executive order on environmental justice and the creation of the first Office of Environmental Justice in the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, thanks to President Biden and Vice President Harris, we are working with communities to update and strengthen the federal government's EJ policy. Last year, which I can't believe it's been a year, the President signed executive order revitalizing our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all, EO 14096 for the nerds in the room. And that EO, again, created the first Office of Environmental Justice at the Council on Environmental Quality. And again, under this administration, we are working hard to make sure that the spirit and the principles of environmental justice seep into all of our federal agencies. And so, again, this summit brings us together to reflect on these early foundations and this administration's leadership. And when I think about the importance of celebrating our collective agency as people, community members, scholars, government folks, advocates, we are here to catalyze further action, again, to advance this whole of government as well as a whole of society approach to environmental justice. So I will tell you, whether you're in the room or virtual, sit back, relax, grab a pen and a paper, be prepared to learn, to be inspired as we hear from some administrative officials as well as on-the-ground leaders that are going to tell their story. And so with that, as we continue to work towards bending this arc towards justice, I am so honored to introduce my boss, Chair Brenda Mallory of the White House Council on Environmental Quality. Again, that's CEQ. And I would just tell you one thing, Chair Mallory took my call last night, almost a couple minutes before midnight. And I will just say, she has an extensive legal career in environmental protection. She's done a lot of great work. But as a person and a true champion of environmental justice, she is no better than anyone. So again, Chair Mallory, the floor is yours.
Oh my God. I will just say that those opening remarks, the acknowledgement of land, Jelana has done a fabulous job of figuring out how to kick us off, and as she said, make this a different kind of event than we often have in these walls. So I'm just so grateful for all of you. I'm grateful. I always love to stand up here and look across the room and just see what it looks like. Such an honor to be here and a privilege to be here. we are so fortunate to have Jalon where she is right now, because, yes, applaud it, because the spirit, the collection of experience and talents that she brings to this role are absolutely right for the moment. So I'm so grateful to have her as the leader of the Environmental Justice Office, first federal chief environmental justice officer here at CEQ. And I will say this event, which has been, it feels like the entire 3.5 years in the making. I feel like we've been talking about at some point that we were going to have a summit, but anyway, it certainly has been many weeks and months in the making, and I think you will find that it was well worth the wait. I got to start off by doing a few thank yous, beginning first with Dr. J, the entire EJ team. Could we please just raise your hand if you're on the EJ team? I was going to start off by naming them, but man, the list was getting too long. I think also one of the things I talk a lot about in CEQ is we do a lot that is, it takes a village. I say that a lot, it takes a village, because every part of the organization really comes together for the biggest things that we do, and this is in that category. So the CEQ engagement team, the comms team, the general counsel team, my entire front office team, our partners at O&B, all across the White House. You'll see from the folks who are speaking, like partners across the federal government. I think a lot has gone into this day, but more importantly, into the work that is being done all across this government to try to institute within our programs environmental justice and the spirit of environmental justice, as Jalon was just saying. So grateful for those partners. Also just want to thank the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council members. Thank you for 3.5 years of the work that you all have done, and for really showing the commitment and the leadership about what this vision of having a White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council means. And so again, if we could have the Advisory Council members to either stand or lift your hand so people know who you are. Thank you so much. Thank you to have so many of you here. It's just such an honor to be in the same room with you. And as I look across the room and see really this sort of diverse and intergenerational movement of people who are devoted to ensuring that their communities have access to clean air, clean water, and healthy environments, we would not be here today without your countless efforts and those of many others to create a program and a sense of what we should be fighting for that allowed this president and this vice president to kind of use those as models for what the program had to look like. And so I just want to lift up that work, that spirit that got us to the point where there was an opportunity for a president like Joe Biden to be able to actually lean into relationships that he built throughout the campaign and then instituted immediately upon arrival in office. And I know that those who made it their life's work to advocate for communities that have been left behind are often overlooked. And I just want to say, as Vernice said, we see you too. I mean, you see us, but we see you, and we are so grateful for what we see when we look out. Communities that have borne the burdens of poisonous air, contaminated water, and unhealthy environments need our support, our efforts, the work that we are doing. And I think it's such an honor to have a chance at this time to be able to play a small role in trying to move our efforts forward to do the right thing, do the right thing. For many decades, elders and leaders in the environmental justice movement charted the path, laying the groundwork, that we are actually trying to lift up and advance in a significant way. And since day one, President Biden and Vice President Harris have been leading the most ambitious environmental justice and climate change agenda in history. But it's grounded in a core belief that I think all of us share, which is that every person deserves access to clean air, to clean water, and to a healthy environment. That should be a basic for all of us. And I think that is, if you look at any of our policies, that's what we try to ground them in ultimately. President Biden recognizes that in the past, the federal government has often failed to do its part to safeguard these most basic protections for every community in the country. And he believes that we have a responsibility to address those wrongs. In April, as Jalon said, the president, April of last year, that's 2023, President Biden signed the executive order on revitalizing our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all, which builds upon the work of many in this room and further embeds environmental justice principles into the federal government. The executive order directs federal agencies to better protect communities from pollution and environmental harms, strengthens engagement with communities, and mobilizes federal agencies to confront existing and legacy barriers and injustices, promotes the latest science, data, and research, including cumulative impacts, and increases accountability and transparency in federal environmental policy. Since then, the federal government has taken important steps to advance the president's vision in the executive order and across the environmental justice agenda. A key component of President Biden's environmental justice agenda is the Justice 40 initiative, which aims to ensure that 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal climate, clean energy, and other investments flow to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized by underinvestment and overburdened by pollution. I'm getting those time signals. As a result, more than 500 programs across 19 federal agencies are being transformed, and agencies are reimagining the way the government delivers benefits like fresher air, cleaner energy, good-paying jobs, and clean water to communities. Throughout the day, you will hear how these programs are already making a difference in communities across the country. And so I'm excited to announce that today the White House is taking several important new steps to advance President Biden and Vice President Harris's historic commitment to environmental justice. Today, we are launching environmentaljustice.gov, a new website showcasing stories of progress as well as resources to help communities navigate federal programs. We are also releasing the second annual Environmental Justice Scorecard that describes the impacts and benefits of more than $600 billion in federal investments through the Justice 40 initiative. I'm also pleased to announce that, that members of the White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council, who are the leaders of the 24 key federal agencies and White House offices, have now signed a new memorandum of understanding to advance effective collaboration across the federal government on environmental justice. And tomorrow, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy is releasing the National Science and Technology Council's first environmental justice science, data, and research plan, which provides agencies with information and resources to advance environmental justice in their activities related to science, data, and research. All of this builds on our work last week to combat plastic pollution with the release of the first comprehensive government-wide strategy to target the entire life cycle of plastic. We know that plastic can occur at every stage of the that pollution can occur at every stage of the plastic life cycle, disproportionately impacting underserved and underinvested in communities, contributing to biodiversity loss, and exacerbating the impacts of climate change. This administration is committed to delivering a whole-of-government approach to ensuring all communities experience the benefits of the environmental protection. And over the past 3.5 years, we have made great progress. We also recognize that delivering these benefits requires a sustained and long-term effort, and there is much more work to do. With a Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court, that is, seems really focused on undermining the ability for us to provide good environmental protection. This last term was another destabilizing event. But while we have seen a setback, I think we all know here that to protect people's human health and the environment, we must forge a new path to find ways to continue to do the work that we're doing. And so with, I think, commitment and resolve, I think we continue to want to work with you to make the President's vision in his executive order on environmental justice a reality for all. We will restore and protect a healthy environment wherever people live, play, work, learn, grow, and worship, so that all people have clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, safe and healthy food to eat, an environment that is climate resilient and free from harmful pollution and chemicals. So thank you for your partnership. Thank you for being here today, and I look forward to the conversations we'll have. And so with that, I will now turn it back to Joanne.
Thank you, Chair Mallory. I was waiting for some screams, from those announcements. Did y'all hear what she said? Yeah. Again, like my pastor says, sometimes we don't know when to get excited, because there's a lot to be unexcited about. So I'm just going to let that marinate, and I'm going to come back to that question a little bit later. But at this time, because I know Sharmla's going to, beat us up at this time, which is good, I want to introduce to some, and I probably don't even need to make this introduction, but the dynamic Peggy Shepard. She is co-founder and executive director of We Act for Environmental Justice in New York, and she has brilliantly and elegantly served as co-chair of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. So, Ms. Peggy, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everyone. Can you all really believe that we're actually here at something called the White House Summit on Environmental Justice? When has that ever happened? And they actually invited EJ people. How big is that? Okay, so we've actually come a long way, but we know we've got a strong vision for where we need to go. And the past 3 years of the Biden-Harris administration, they've been critical, they've been amazing for the environmental justice movement and for the communities that depend on our advocacy, our organizing, and our financial support. Now, we've demanded and experienced strong federal attention on the inequitable impacts of federal actions on the environmental health and the climate resilience of people in low income. But we need to reach new milestones in our work to safeguard our communities and to address the unequal impacts of climate change. Now, an important milestone was achieved 30 years ago when we celebrated President Clinton's Executive Order 12898, Federal Actions to Address Environmental Justice in Minority Populations and Low-Income Populations. Now, that was a milestone moment for the movement, but it was the first time our government actually acknowledged the disparity of pollution and other environmental hazards that our communities have been subjected to for generations. Now, the intention was good. It catalyzed federal engagement at the NIHS and the DOT, but it fell short on regulation and funding support. But an important watershed moment arrived nearly 27 years later when President Biden signed Executive Order 14008, shortly after taking office in his first 100 days. Now, this was designed to tackle the climate crisis with a whole-of-government approach that centered justice and included the landmark Justice 40 initiative and establishment of the We Act, which I have had the honor of co-chairing with the incomparable Richard Moore, the leader of the avant-garde He was the leader of the avant-garde in the true sense of the word, the Southwest Network for Economic and Environmental Justice, which had an annual convening that could not be missed. Thank you so much, Richard Moore, for your leadership. But you know, the Northeast, where I'm from, continues to provide leadership in that New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act was an important model for the Justice 40 initiative, which set a goal of 40% of the benefits of federal investments in clean energy distributed to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, overburdened by pollution, what we know as EJ communities. And I see Elizabeth Jean-Pierre here, who's a part of that CLCPA, one of my colleagues from New York. So thank you, Elizabeth, for your leadership. But having established a framework for government-wide action on environmental justice, President Biden went on to issue another executive order, 14096, last April, directing the federal government to build upon and strengthen its commitment to deliver environmental justice to all communities across the country through an approach that's informed by scientific research, high-quality data, and meaningful federal engagement with environmental justice concerns. And the Biden-Harris administration certainly delivered on the investments promised with the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, providing hundreds of billions of dollars in investments in at-risk communities. And thanks to Justice 40, we can help address decades of neglect and disinvestment in our communities while helping to transition them to renewable energy, reducing legacy pollution, mitigating the impacts of climate change, and creating good green jobs. Now, many of us here have provided leadership to the NEJAC, actually established under Bill Riley and the Bush administration. However, the establishment of the WEJAC marked the first time that a presidential advisory body had been tasked with providing recommendations broadly to the federal government on environmental justice. And I'm happy to report that the president has announced the appointment of 12 new members, some of which I believe are here, to the WEJAC Advisory Council, which gives our communities even greater access and representation. Clearly, we've come a long way. We have many goals to achieve. We can do that with an ethical, innovative, and effective administration that sees us as partners in achieving healthy communities. Now, as Dolly Burwell from Warren County said to me, I think it's going to take trust between communities and government to be able to achieve environmental justice. We know she's correct, because so many of us here have dedicated our lives to this work. We've answered the call, the screams from our communities. We've worked to achieve and build that trust. And in this moment, we're in uncharted waters, which means this can be a time of opportunity or disaster. But regardless of political outcomes, we will have to come together fiercely, as we know how to do, and to fight for the lives of our communities, both here and abroad. So thank you all for being here, because we've got a big fight still ahead of us. And one of the people who are going to help us in that fight is Administrator Michael Regan. I would like to introduce Administrator Regan, who's the 16th administrator of the EPA, the first African-American man to lead the EPA, an HBCU graduate like myself. Regan grew up, here, okay. Mr. HBCU Bob Bowler, okay. Yes, he developed an appreciation for the environment while hunting and fishing with his father and grandfather. We're happy he chose to follow in their footsteps, dedicating himself to a life of public service. As an administrator, he's been accessible and visible as he leads the agency in its efforts to tackle climate change and advance environmental justice and ensure that all of us have clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and the opportunity to lead a healthy life. Before becoming administrator, he previously served as the secretary of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. And recently I spoke to Dolly Burwell, the lead organizer of the 1982 Warren County protest of a PCB dump in Afton, North Carolina, and she was so grateful for the presence of Administrator Regan at the 40th anniversary of the EJ movement in North Carolina. It's an iconic site that some consider to be the birthplace and the catalyst for the EJ movement. So thank you to Administrator Regan. Please give him a warm welcome.
Well, good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Shepherd, for that warm introduction, and thank you for spending time with us yesterday. I really appreciate your comments and your wisdom as always. Chair Mallory, thank you for your leadership, and thank you for convening all of us today. We're delighted to be here. It's really good to be here today. And, it's not lost on me that so many of you in this room have spent years, if not decades, fighting for cleaner, healthier, and a more equitable America. Not only do I want to thank you, but I also want to acknowledge publicly that our country and our world is better because of your leadership, because of your efforts. I saw this firsthand as many of you helped me embark upon our Journey to Justice tour together in 2021, traveling through the Black Belt of the Deep South, then going through the Appalachian Mountains to West Virginia, going to Puerto Rico, and then traveling as far as Alaska, visiting with communities there. Being on the ground together, we all elevated the voices of those communities. We listened to their lived experiences and the environmental challenges that they experience each and every day, and then we all worked together as partners to come up with solutions that would actually work for their communities. And folks, fortunately, we have a president and a vice president who have created a roadmap for all of us to follow to pursue that vision. President Biden now is the first sitting president to talk about environmental justice not once, but twice in the State of the Union. The president's commitment to EJ is unwavering. And we have a vice president who has been committed to environmental justice her entire career. As San Francisco District Attorney, she created the city's first environmental justice unit. As Attorney General of California, she held corporate polluters accountable, making sure that no one is above the law. As Senator, she championed environmental justice legislation that became central to our historic Inflation Reduction Act. And now, as Vice President, she has remained a climate and environmental justice champion. It's safe to say that our President and our Vice President have set the tone, not just for EPA, but for this government from day one. And listen, I for one stand before you proudly to say with confidence and humility that I believe we are delivering on their mandate. And we have no intention of slowing down. Through all of our work, we put the health and prosperity of communities and people first. And just take a look at the last year. In response to the conditions that we saw on the ground in Cancer Alley during our first leg of the Journey to Justice tour, EPA has issued a rule that will slash cancer-causing pollution and reduce elevated cancer risk by 96%. We've proposed new improvements to our lead and copper rule, a major advancement in protecting children and adults from lead in drinking water, accelerating our progress to replace 100% of the lead pipes in this country. That's something that the president has said we would do, and we're on course to do that. We all know that that's disproportionately impacting our black and brown communities. We issued the final vehicle rules for cars and trucks and heavy-duty vehicles, which will avoid more than 8 billion tons of carbon pollution, resulting in cleaner air and less pollution for low-income and disadvantaged communities that are often located near these major highways. And in April, we announced a suite of rules reducing pollution from coal and natural gas plants. Folks, we all know that 70% of the nation's coal and natural gas plants are located in communities of color or low-income communities, making their health impacts and outcomes disproportionately worse. That's unacceptable, and we've taken action. We've also recently finalized a rule to reduce methane emissions and other harmful air pollutants, because we know that sharp cuts in methane are among the most critical actions that the United States can take in the short term to reduce climate change. But listen, we also know that those harmful VOC pollutants that are coming from these methane facilities are choking our communities. Ultimately, we will reduce 58 million tons of methane pollution over the next 15 years, but we have not forgotten to ground our regulations in not just the pursuit of the climate crisis, but also public health and the disproportionate impact choking our communities. So let me say without pause, throughout all of our work, I think the record reflects that we have at EPA and the Biden-Harris administration across the board have put communities first. For years, communities and environmental justice leaders have advocated for a partnership with their government to help build capacity from the ground up. I think you all know that EPA's Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers will do just that, working with over 160 partners who will receive at least $10 million apiece, providing technical assistance, training, and capacity building support. And last year, we announced $600 million in funding for grant makers across the country who will distribute these critical federal resources to the communities that need them the most, that have the best solutions ready to go. And through all of our environmental justice work, it's important for you all to understand that EPA is letting the communities lead the way. Last year, we announced approximately $2 billion, that's billion with a B, of funding available to communities through EPA's Community Change Grants, the single largest investment in environmental justice history. Yes. These grants will support local projects that deploy clean energy, reduce pollution, strengthen climate resilience, and build capacity to help our communities tackle their unique and persistent environmental justice challenges. And I'm excited to say very soon we'll announce that first group of winners. But there's a unique aspect of this grant process. It's a rolling grant competition. And so monthly, we'll be announcing recipients that will receive dollars to invest in their communities. Applications for the program are open through November 21st, 2024, so please get your application in. So listen, I'm gonna wrap it up by saying I challenge you all to keep raising your voices and keep holding us accountable. It's important that you all know we hear you, we're listening, and together we're building a more equitable and just world, while also protecting this planet for future generations. I think you all know that our work will not cease and will not be done till every child can drink clean air, drink clean water, breathe clean air, and have a healthy planet to live on. So thank you all for the partnership, thank you for the leadership, and I think I'm giving 1 minute back.
Thank you, Administrator Regan, for your leadership, and I think folks perked up when you said that was a continual, process rolling. So y'all got that date. What's that date again? November? Oh, well, y'all know what's the date? All right, you've done your job. Yeah, I know. Thank you, sir. All right, you all okay? Okay, all right, we're gonna keep on rolling. So now I have the honor of introducing Mr. Ali Zaidi, who again is our assistant to the president and national climate advisor and such a key advisor in support of our environmental justice work. So Ali, the floor is yours.
No fun following Michael Regan. It's just so humbling to be here with all of you today and to take stock of the progress that we've made. And I think as Administrator Regan closed, I'll begin to acknowledge that the work's not done till every kid in America has clean air to breathe and clean water to drink. And as much as the progress we've made, that's still unfinished business. I think about the environmental justice movement as a very distinct thread of the broader call for equity and fairness that is woven through the fabric of the work we try to do together here in the Biden-Harris administration. And what makes it distinct is that it sees not just looking forward the work we need to do to level the playing field, but recognizes that there's repair yet to be done. I was in Philadelphia last week at Bartram's Garden, community farming, and they have a mascot, so to speak, a bird on their T-shirts and their jackets emblazoned that looks backwards and moves forward. Sankofa, that's right. And Sankofa, I think, has a lesson for all of us working in public policy, and that's to recognize where we're coming from to inform the work that we do as we march forward. And I see the echoes of that as many of you joined the president at the ancestral footsteps of the Grand Canyon, land that was taken away, where indigenous communities were blocked out in the name of the establishment of a national park. Joe Biden joined with you, with Carletta, with Jade, with others at his side, to sign into the law protections not just that opened up a frontier into the future, but did the work of repair looking back. We think about our transportation policy in the United States, that if it did not steal land, divided communities. Today, thanks to your work, we talk about the billions of dollars of IRA and bill, and it's easy to gloss over what that means. But for all of you, you know that's 4th Avenue in Birmingham. That's trying to reunite Barrio Logan in San Diego. It's the Stitch in Atlanta. It's I-81 in Syracuse. It's dirt turning to do the important work of repair where once a racist transportation policy reinforced segregation. That was environmental injustice. Reconnecting communities is the work of environmental justice. We have communities across the country where it is literally hotter today because of a racist housing policy. Redline communities literally hotter today. We plant trees in those communities, 385 projects from Oakland, California to Hartford, Connecticut, to cool the places we heated up. You got Acting Secretary Todman investing not just in the resilience of all housing, but also with particular attention to public housing in Chicago, announcing the progress of implementing the Inflation Reduction Act. When we invest the $50 billion in water, we recognize that there are rural water systems because of Catherine Flowers and others who have lifted up the import of places left out and left behind. And when we go after the lead pipes, it's not just the places ABC and CNN have showed up. It's got to be lead pipes out of the water every single place. So I'm way over time. But I just feel so fired up about the progress we've made. I think about Tom helping us think through capping wells and sealing those mines left behind by companies who declared bankruptcy and left the communities holding the bag. I think about Mark Magana walking into the Oval Office having guaranteed access to green space in Los Angeles to communities that had been denied it. Dr. Robinson and our partners at the AFL-CIO who have helped work with Teresa at DOL to make sure we are putting forward the first extreme heat standard. Jerome Foster, who made sure he wasn't the only young person in town and at the table, who helped us architect the American Climate Corps, which is recruiting from the communities it is meant to serve. Latricia Adams, I met with yesterday as we try to make progress in the Tennessee Valley, a place where there's unprecedented build out of fossil infrastructure. We've got to make sure we deliver clean energy. Beverly Wright, who made sure that Joe Biden was the first president who called out Cancer Alley, and all of you who worked with Michael Regan to make sure it's no longer that way. That's the kind of progress we need to make, and it's in all of the places you could possibly imagine. Susan, working with you. Direct pay sounds like this weird thing in the tax code. It's the reason our communities are going to deliver clean power in houses of worship. There's so much progress, and it's happening. Just think about yesterday. Administrator Guzman working with the SBA to deliver green lending and opportunity to communities that have been left out of clean finance. It's just profound, the progress. But here's the deal. We still have a long ways to go to clean up that soot and smog. We have a long ways to go to end the scourge of diesel pollution in our communities. We've got to make dirty peakers obsolete. We've got to get the lead out, not just of the water, but out of our paint, out of our housing. Peggy reminds me of that all the time. We have to make sure we breathe meaning into the Dubai Consensus, which says all y'all who showed up to the COP last year, that we turn that into reality. We've got to open that green door wide open for everybody wanting to get into a clean energy job. And as much action as we take, we've got to be reminded that it's only as good as the accountability on the back end. I think of Peggy, I think of Bob, I think of Richard, so many who have counseled us in making sure cumulative impacts is not just a concept, it is the backstop and the insurance policy to make sure that we don't dig a deeper hole as we do the important work of repair. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris have been your partner. There's a lot of work left to do. There's very little time left for me to speak. I am so very grateful to you and for your partnership. Thank you so much for being the inspiration.
Thank you, Ali. Keeping it real. All right. Now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Nani Coloretti. She is the Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, better known as OMB. And what I will say that it is truly a family affair with all of our environmental justice initiatives. CEQ does nothing alone. And two of our major initiatives, we work hand in hand with Nani and her staff. So Nani, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. J. I can call you that, and we're in a room of friends. It is such an honor to be here today. Thank you for including us. We have been working hand in hand, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about our work because I also know time is short and we are running over. So, as you all have already heard, through the Justice 40 initiative, the Biden-Harris administration is committed to delivering 40% of the overall benefits of certain climate, clean energy, and other federal investments to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized and overburdened by pollution. At the Office of Management and Budget, we have been working around the clock with CEQ in partnership with federal agencies and others in the federal family to make this a reality. And we've made great progress. Today, over 500 programs across a number of agencies in the federal government have been identified to be covered under the Justice 40 initiative. Many of these programs are new programs created by this administration. So for example, 74 of the Justice 40 covered programs are Inflation Reduction Act programs, including programs such as EPA's Solar for All grants and the Department of Interior's Native Hawaiian Climate Resilience Program. So in that vein, we estimate that the Biden-Harris administration has secured over $600 billion in federal dollars for the Justice 40 covered programs through appropriations, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and IRA funding. So OMB is working with CEQ and our federal family to not only provide accountability and transparency on the delivery of benefits for the Justice 40 covered programs, but to also support Justice 40 as a long-term transformation of government. And the EJ scorecard, the Environmental Justice Scorecard we're releasing today, is just one example of our collaboration, and more is to come. So just last week, I was in my home state of Hawaii discussing how the federal government can help the state rebuild from the devastating fires in Maui. And there, I saw firsthand the early fruits of our labor. In Hawaii, community and state leaders were very interested in learning more about the Justice 40 initiative and the environmental justice tools developed by this administration. More importantly, communities who have in the past been ignored or forgotten now have a seat at the table when talking about how to rebuild and how to invest in those communities. And that's really the effect of the work here in this room. So that's not just happening in Hawaii, it's happening all across this country. In a few minutes, we'll be joined by a group of esteemed community leaders who will tell us how Justice 40 is transforming lives in their communities. And so you'll hear in a few minutes from that panel, the investments we're making in Justice 40 are real, and they are already making a difference in urban and rural frontline communities all across this country. So part of this hard work that you have all been doing for many years is also happening here today, where we get a chance to hear your stories about how this work is rippling through the community. And what we're doing in Justice 40 has never been done before, and I'll just say it's not easy, but it's the right thing to do. The Biden-Harris administration remains dedicated to fulfilling our Justice 40 commitment because we know that as we lift up those who have been left out for so long, we make this country stronger and we make it more resilient for the future. And I would just like to say thank you. Thank you to each and every one of you in this room and for those watching online for your tireless work on these issues, for telling your stories, and for keeping us going, because I can tell you that it matters. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. J, who will introduce the next panel.
Thank you, Nani. All right, can I have Brother Harold Mitchell to the front in the first panel? I am so excited for us to move into the space where we are going to hear from community. And so he's going to moderate our first panel, Investing in America, Justice 40 in Action. Harold Mitchell is a member of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. He is also the executive director of the Regenesis Institute in South Carolina. So Harold, the floor is yours.
Thank you, ma'am. And I will, because of time, I will go ahead and call our panelists to come on up and join me. Keith Baker, Reconnect Rondo, St. Paul, Minnesota. Governor Stephen Roe Lewis, Gila River, Indian Community, Arizona. Bridget Murray, Achieving Community Tasks Successfully, ACTS, Houston, Texas. And Abel Alaviv from Prince George County, Maryland. And Mustafa, you said it earlier when you were talking about our ancestors looking at us and the shoulders that we stand on, the impact those that have died. But it was ironic, I was sitting there as you were saying that, thinking about 4 years ago this week, actually, it was Democratic candidate Joe Biden talking to many environmental justice leaders, many of you who are in the room, on several Zoom calls. And at that time, he asked, what can I do to advance environmental justice? And listening to all the comments all morning, what can I do to advance environmental justice? I heard somebody say $600 billion. I heard Administrator Regan talk about a grant for $2 billion just a second ago. And Jelon, I'm almost like you. I'm from South Carolina, the Baptist preachers, and this is a dead audience, as if everybody's rolling in billions of dollars. I'm not understanding. I know some of y'all woke up and, rolled your billions of dollars in your suitcases. But please, let's before we hear from this panel, though, because we're here to talk about implementation and these impacts, and we've heard, from many of the folks in the agencies talk about the historic nature that we have here. But I want to say, too, with the community conversations meetings that we've had across the country, going with Chair Mallory, CEQ, and several of the federal agencies, hearing some agencies that we've never heard of before. When we were in Albuquerque, New Mexico, we heard about the $13 million investment of an agricultural STEM school there in Albuquerque. We heard from the Department of Treasury talk about the cleanups of stacking tax credits on legacy sites. This is something that we've never talked about before. And as we go into this conversation here, this is something that we have got to do for the remaining time, Vernice, that you stated, these 4 months that we have left. And that is to get out, let people know what's going on. Doing those community conversations, the biggest thing we saw was people talking about information overload. It's too much information coming at me. But the beauty was connecting the dots, seeing local governments, hearing for the first time that this president, through the Inflation Reduction Act, put the provision where local governments could apply directly themselves. This is where you saw the impact, not only in Jackson, but in Alabama, when you look at the lead poisoning in the drinking water. That's something that went on for, Dr. Bullitt, for decades, I know, talking about, how many? Forever. Forever we've heard there, and Deion Sanders raised it, but it was only until this president and the passage of IRA that they were able to address it at the local level. So what we want to do is, I want the members of the WEJAC, I know you've raised your hand already, and I'm keeping my time, but could you stand? Because one of the things that President Biden, when he was talking with us, could you stand, those on the WEJAC? WEJAC members, you can raise your hand, Richard. This was the other part of his commitment. This is the tangible commitment that he said, I want to hear, not just during that campaign, but it's like, I want you to keep me honest. I want you to keep these agencies honest. We've got work to do, and we still have work to do. But that is a tangible example, and we need to be talking about the tangibles, which is where we're getting ready to get to in our panel. And we're going to start with you, Dr. Baker. And sorry for you get the title doctor when you're in the White House.
Yeah, I guess.
Yes, sir. But you've been working for years to restore the reconnect portion of your community that was torn apart by the construction of the freeways in the 1960s, the Rondo neighborhood, St. Paul community. Your organization recently received $2 million from the Department of Transportation's Reconnecting Communities program, which is part of the President's Justice 40 initiative. Can you share with us how this funding has transformed your community to catalyze the work that you've been doing there in Rondo?
Well, I appreciate the question. I appreciate being a part of this incredible event here today. I think about the names of the people first. Tony Carter, Deb Montgomery, Nick Kalik, Marvin Anderson, Mary Kay Boyd. These are the people that lead a nonprofit organization that I have the privilege to work with, who are descendants of the Rondo community. These are the leaders. I want to take us back, just if we can just imagine, from 1830 to 1956, the community of Rondo in St. Paul, Minnesota, emerged and became a thriving African American community. And in 1956, the freeway came through and destroyed the social, cultural, economic, civic, spiritual fabric of the community. This is Detroit, this is New Orleans, this is Portland, this is Miami. We're now understanding the story. The reason why I start there is because the journey didn't begin with Reconnect Rondo in 2017 at its founding. In fact, the idea to reconnect the community began as early as 2009, when there was a Central Light Rail corridor going through, and the NEPA process did not consider sufficiently the experience and the history of African Americans for 170 years. And there were no stops along the corridor in the Rondo neighborhood. So when we think about NEPA, environmental justice, and what this administration has positioned us for, it allows us to take that $2 million for Reconnect Rondo to support the environmental process, to ensure that the history of Rondo isn't forgotten. So Reconnect Rondo is a nonprofit organization leading a restorative movement to reignite an African American cultural enterprise district that was Rondo before the freeway came through. And in fact, our process, meaning our DOT in Minnesota, is responsible for the corridor between St. Paul and Minneapolis. And what Reconnect Rondo has been able to do is to separate the process and take responsibility for the environmental process and analysis. We're one of 4 nonprofits that were successful out of 46 in the first round. And these resources are directed towards igniting that environmental process while MnDOT is also going through its environmental process. At some point, we shall meet. But we are here to inform MnDOT, and we have great partnerships, not only with MnDOT, but the city, the county, Met Council, and so on. And just so that folks know, I spent 18 years with the Department of Transportation in Minnesota. And so I know the levers, the systems, the processes, the tools, and the resources, and I'm fortunate enough to lead this effort in St. Paul. I do want to also ensure this, that we've conducted, through resources from our state legislature, we received $6.2 million, and we've been in pre-development. So the timing of this environmental resource that comes to us through this Reconnecting Communities process is very, very, very important, because it allows us to continue that pre-development work.
Thank you. Thank you. And Governor Lewis, you have said you have a vision to support a new generation of community agriculturalists with the goal of promoting and protecting the Gila River Indian community water. Tell us about the impact solar over the canal project and the partnership between the Bureau of Reclamation and the Gila River Indian community with a $6 million Biden and Harris administration funding that covered through Justice 40 in your community. And also on the clean production, the clean energy production with your water conservation, safeguarding your natural resources.
Thank you. Kuk sialik, Anya Anapchugat, Governor Stephen R. Lewis, Amjit, Sakaton Guuki, the Gila River Indian community. It's an honor to be here. I want to thank Vice Chair Carletta Talusi, one of my classmates, undergrad, and also the sacred words from the opening poem, the opening sacred words that also invoked one of my mentors, the amazing, visionary, legendary past leader of the Cherokee Nation, Miss Wilma Mankiller as well. And that sets up exactly, I think, what we're talking about. We're talking about, at least in my history and tradition, we're talking about standing on the shoulders that those have come before us, right? My late father, Rod Lewis, was the first Native American attorney to successfully argue a case before the U.S. Supreme Court. And it had to do with tribal sovereignty. It had to do with our very existence. And he also, subsequently, he dedicated his whole legal career for fighting for our water. Now, the story for the Gila River Indian community, and this comes to the great innovation that has been a part of our value system. You know, our water was stolen. I can't say it any other way. Over 150 years ago, brought our community, the Akim-Ra'atam, which is our namesake, people of the river, to literally extinction. We had hundreds, if not thousands, of community members that died during this time. And so this is the story that we carry with us. This is the story of resilience, of survival. And so out of this, thank you, Mr. Mitchell, for that, you know, for leading me to talking about exactly what our vision is. Now, the vision is that I refer to now, moving forward, is the goal of the Gila River Indian community to a blue-green economy. Now, the blue represents our goal to bring back the flow of the Gila River, and the green is for our agriculture and a greener climate. Now, our work with this incredible White House Biden-Harris administration has helped us launch projects needed to get closer to this goal. Now, the implementation of the Justice 40 initiative, the IRA, the BIL, all of these critical tools became available to tribal governments across Indian country in a way that has been, in a word, historic. The community has partnered with this administration on our Solar Over Canal project, which you mentioned. This project is the first of its kind in the Western Hemisphere, not just the first of its kind in Indian country, the first of its kind in this Western Hemisphere. We've built out the first section, I'm proud of this project. We're now poised to go live and turn the power on, first power, in September of this year. So this is a pilot project, but the community has over 150 miles of canals throughout our reservation, and it's our goal to become the first net zero tribe by producing 1.2 megawatts of power, reducing evaporation from the water in the canal by at least 50%. Now that goes to about 3.5 million gallons of water that we're going to be saving every year. Now, this is ambitious, but the support and the investments from this administration have allowed us to dream big, to innovate, to take actions for a brighter future, for our country and for Mother Earth. This project has been one of the several that we've partnered with our administration on. It's been an all-of-government approach. This section of the canal, we've partnered with the Bureau of Reclamation, and another section with the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, our reclaimed water pipeline is another project with the Department of Interior, our transportation project, a tribal, state, federal project, which is also with the Department of Transportation. All of these projects have been made possible by the administration's investment in the community. That's the significant infrastructure revitalization needs. And this Justice 40 initiative has provided the education and incentives needed across the government to help us achieve these long-term results. And this comes from the top. I saw our Vice President Harris, when she arrived in Arizona, had a few minutes just to tell her about our solar project. That led to an invitation to her Vice President's Earth Day event, meetings in the White House, her staff, and ultimately the Vice President coming to our community and visiting 2 infrastructure sites, including our reclaimed water pipeline. It was 115 degrees when she came out in July. She didn't even shrug it. She shrugged that off. But the commitment is evident. I think we all see this, of this administration, of the Biden-Harris administration. We know the positive impacts that accrue the entire community in the state. We look forward to continually working with this White House and this administration. Thank you. Woo! Okay.
Hey, we're on a roll. Miss Murray. From Houston, you got to make Houston proud, man. Your work is focused on improving community health. And can you tell us about the $500,000 in funding that ACTS received through EPA's grant on community air monitoring and how it has impacted your organization and the work that you're doing in the community of Houston?
Sure. Again, I'd like to also say how I'm so proud to be here today and really would like to share with all of you how a community in the Houston area, we are near the Port of Houston. We are surrounded by freeways. So our community identified back in 2018 that air quality, air pollution was a concern. And we started working on that prior to even receiving grant funds for that purpose. But by the time we were receiving the grant funds, we were also able to network with 3 other communities or organizations that also represent communities that have been impacted by air pollution and other environmental justice issues. So we are actually broadening our approach for air quality or our monitoring of air pollution, and also partnering with a mobile monitoring unit so that we can also measure urban air toxics. So we're not only looking at the air pollution that we're measuring with our stationary air monitors, but we're also measuring urban air toxics around ethylene oxide, acrolein, and also 1,3-butadiene. So these are the kinds of projects that we've actually started in our community to be able to address some of the pollution concerns that we have, knowing that we live in a state where cumulative impact is not considered, and how we know that our communities, and all of these communities are majority and minority, and how we have been impacted by these health effects of the various air toxins that we're exposed to.
Thank you. Thank you for saving that time back, ma'am. Houston. Dr. Wright, that's one of those hub examples. Good leadership. And lastly, we'll have Dr. Olivio. Your organization has received funding from USDA's Urban and Community Forestry Program, a Justice 40 program where 100% of the grants went to communities in all 50 states DC identified as disadvantaged by the climate and economic justice screening tool to not only plant trees to address heat, but also to build a workforce and train the next generation. Could you tell us about your project?
Yes, thank you. I also appreciate the honorary doctor, but I am not a doctor, as I claim to be. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for this opportunity to share about the work that we do. My name is Abel Olivo. I'm the executive director for Defensores de la Cuenca, which means watershed defenders. We work to engage Latinos and Spanish speakers in watershed-related issues by creating opportunities to have positive connections in nature. We share information about the benefits. We invite them to participate in our program. And we, as you are correctly stated, one of the recipients for the IRA USDA funding. We are the only Latino-led and Latino-focused organization east of the Mississippi to be a direct recipient. There are other organizations, Green Latinos and what's the other way? Hispanics, Hispanic Action Foundation, who are pass-through organizations. And that really, I say that because it alludes to the introduction that our programs really work to build capacity and equip other people at the community level to begin the work that we are interested in undertaking. The Embajadores de los Árboles program, is Tree Ambassadors, is a paid adult training capacity building program that recognizes and centers the barrier to participation for a lot of our community members, because we're asking their most precious commodity, and that's their time. Time away from work, time away from church, time away from family. And the communities most impacted by these issues, air quality, water quality, can least afford to leave work and not be compensated. So we recognize that. We pay them roughly $30 an hour, up to $6,000 for participation in Embajadores. And the idea is that we share information, we help to build out their base of knowledge around trees, the benefits, the importance of trees, and we ask them to then engage their communities where they live We are primarily Latino, Spanish speakers ourselves, but it doesn't mean that we're connected in the way that the residents are connected. So we really value their connection, their placement, their time, and ask them to help us achieve those goals. So they help us find locations to plant trees, and just by default, with the communities that we engage, those are the communities that were most impacted by heat island and climate, high rates of asthma and heart disease. And it is so, so important that we really continue to work and make change in these communities. As a Latino kid myself, I'm fourth generation, but I started school speaking Spanish. And in those times, bilingualism was not something that was encouraged. Look today to the communities, the immigrant communities that we engage, and have them go into school while also suffering asthma. There's the language issue, trying to overcome and trying to adapt. But you can't breathe. Then you have this performance issue that you're like, well, I guess I'm not good at school. Well, I guess I'll drop out. Well, that has so many ripple impacts, long-term economic opportunities. So those educational attainment possibilities are impacted by our climate and where we live. So that's the work that we do to engage the community, invite them to join us, to have positive connections, and to really build out at the capacity at the community level.
And thank you for that. And as a follow-up, on our follow-up questions that we have for our panelists, Mr. Baker, the U.S. Department of Transportation estimates that at least 1 million people and businesses were displaced by decades of harmful urban renewal projects and legacy policy decisions in the build-out of the federal highway system. Can you speak to how the Reconnecting Communities program is historic in nature?
Right. I think we've all heard how historic the legislation has been and how important the legislation has been. For the Rondo community, 700 homes and 300 businesses were destroyed. When we think about it quantitatively in our analysis, that's $35 million of intergenerational wealth lost. But if we calculate the value of the homes, if they had not been taken, that value is $250 million. But that's the transactional loss. There's a whole nother piece, and we're talking about the social fabric, right? The spiritual fabric. And so our past prosperity study really speaks to that as well. By 18 different measures, some that have mentioned here in terms of air quality, in terms of overall health, 18 different indicators, the community of Rondo ranks net negative. So the intersection of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, climate reduction focus, the Inflation Reduction Act, what's going on with EPA, what's going on with energy, the intersection of this is a way to leverage forward, right, in a very comprehensive way. So we're proposing 21 acres of new land over a highway with all of these considerations. The other thing that I'd like to at least mention as well is similar to the gathering that we have here. It's an opportunity for us to exchange, and I want to acknowledge Dr. Bullard, who's going to be joining us at a summit in St. Paul, September 11th through the 13th, to really focus in on environmental justice and the very subjects that we're talking about here. But without question, the impact has been dramatic. It's been root shock to the system. And so the key question for us is, how do you restore a community leveraging transportation investment, the very policy mechanism and dollar mechanism, to bring about better quality of life? So while we have a focus on environmental justice, we have to think about NEPA, social, environmental, and economic, because it's about establishing that foundation. So we imagine 576 housing units. We imagine 13 acres of open green space for public gathering. We imagine having business incubation space, a marketplace. We imagine institutions like a new library even connected to schools. And so we're seeing this as a tremendous opportunity to reignite a community devastated by the past, but yet setting conditions for the future. And I think the legislation that the Biden administration has put in place has without question allowed us to set those conditions for the future.
Next, Governor Lewis. As many here know, the administration identifies communities that benefits from the Justice 40 initiative using something called the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. The tool includes all lands within the boundaries of federally recognized tribes. What does this focus on tribal nations in President Biden's environmental justice work mean for indigenous communities?
Right. So this tool is another example of the depth and understanding that this White House has about the impacts of the historic underfunding and the prior failed federal policies that have been on our tribal lands. Now, each of the factors considered, critical factors, climate change, health, housing, legacy pollution, transportation, water, wastewater, and workforce development, which we are all talking about in some form or fashion, are these areas that have been impacted, especially on our tribal homelands and our tribal governments for generations. Now, what we've seen over the past few years, however, is that when tribes are given the tools, a seat at the table, the resources, we not only succeed, but we are innovative. And we also think outside of our borders and make investments that benefit not only our states, but our regions as well. So take the I-10 project, for example. The I-10 project that we're currently undertaking with the administration, the state of Arizona, has been needed for decades. The improvements to the I-10 across the Southwest stopped at our reservation boundary and picked up on the other side of our reservation. We were completely left out of any improvements, which created safety issues for our community members, all who traveled on the I-10. Now, that 26-mile of section of the I-10 that runs through our community borders was referred to as a fatal funnel because of the amount of traffic and the fatalities that occurred every year. Now, it's hard to envision a plan that would deliberately leave out an entire community with little disregard for the life of our members and using those others using this roadway, but that is what historically has happened when it came to infrastructure planning for tribal governments. The same can be said for each of the areas that the tool analyzes. So this administration, this historic funding in healthcare, in housing and climate projects, infrastructure, has shown that tribal lands are sacred, that our communities, all of our communities matter, that we're good partners, we're stewards, and that we have the answers for how to meet the needs of our members and our lands by exercising our own sovereignty. And at the end of the day, tribal governments are only as strong as our federal partner. And I can tell you today that tribes across the United States feel strong and rooted in our sovereignty and self-determination with this White House as our partner. All I got to say is, as I end, let's make this moment a movement, y'all. Thank you.
And Ms. Murray, you also work with the Justice 40 regional hubs organized by the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice and the Bullitt Center. Can you share a bit about the impact of the hub's technical assistance work and its connections to community organizations?
Sure. I'd also like to, I guess, kind of step back a little bit and just speak to the fact that our organization, Achieving Community Tasks Successfully, or ACTS, started working with the Bullitt Center and Deep South Center back in 2017 when they started the HBCU CBO Consortium, which was really a training ground for a lot of organizations at that time on planning and identifying threats and how to pursue those things. So when they created the hubs, that then became an opportunity to work even with other organizations as well, understanding some of the issues that they were facing, and also the planning that has to go in when you're going through these different grant applications. All of our communities engaged in our particular grant or basically classified as disadvantaged. And we know that we have so many communities that deal with freeway pollution. My community in particular, we see over 300,000 vehicles on the freeways that are near our community on a daily basis. So we're looking at two major freeways in the Houston area that we're impacted by. in addition to being near the port as well. So the health awareness that we're working to include in this grant application as we work with not only our communities, but communities at large, this new collaboration that we now have with our health departments, both at the city and the county level, and then also being able to continue to work with the Bullard Center and Environmental Defense Fund, or EDF, for technical assistance, has been able to provide us with what we need to be able to continue this effort, not only today, but in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. And last, Mr. Olivia, can you tell us more about how the $2 million your organization received through the Urban Forestry Program is helping your organization engage more Spanish-speaking community members who previously have not had an opportunity to engage?
Yeah, so as I mentioned a bit earlier, it allows us to expand our Tree Ambassadors program to new areas. We're fairly new, just 4 years young. But in that time, we've been able to make a lot of connections, a lot of progress, and a lot of gain a lot of followers and participants. I think because it speaks to the need and the interest. There are certainly organizations out there that are working to invite the Spanish-speaking community to come in, but don't really maybe take it as a second thought. Our primary way of operating is Spanish-focused, Spanish language, immigrant communities first and foremost. And if you speak Spanish and you're not self-identified as Latino, Latina, Latinx, you're more than welcome, but it's going to be in Spanish. So this really allows us to engage more of the population throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which is where our service area is. We have been working in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Baltimore City, and DC region, as far down as Fredericksburg, Virginia. And this would allow us to expand our programs and have more of a reach and capacity building opportunities. So this really is crucial to the development of the pipeline of the future. So these programs really allow us to and support us for the long term, or at least the immediate term, to invite more people into into action.
Well, great. And could you help me to give this panel a round of applause for investing in America? As you can see, these resources are being deployed across the country throughout various communities from one end of the coast to the other. And so we have to continue to go along with this theme that you could hear through this entire panel, and that was coalition building and collaboration. This is the only way that you can get those resources into the communities so that we can see the tangible differences that people across the country can say, hey, I saw where that $600 billion went to. And I will say that even when the former president down in North Carolina came in, the former president told the folks there in North Carolina how he was going to bring infrastructure dollars there for 4 years. Never happened, never left them a penny. 1 week after the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed, Vice President Harris came into North Carolina with the secretary and brought $900 million into North Carolina for their infrastructure work there in North Carolina. We have to get out here and tell these stories about what this administration is doing, what it's investing, and how the changes are being seen in our community. So thank you. We have to continue this work for the next 4 months and beyond so that we can see a new administration with, and I'm going to go ahead and say it because I'm on the outside, President Harris.
I plead the fifth, but you know Harold, he's going to do what he wants, but no. So let's appreciate this panel. Are you trying to get a picture? Okay. Y'all look pretty for the camera. All right, I tell you, thank you so much, Abel, Bridget, Governor Lewis, and Keith. So wonderful. And now, because we know that y'all are human, we're going to take a little bit of a break. There are refreshments outside, and I want to use this time to thank the National Wildlife Federation for providing those refreshments. So thank you. And I want to ask very nicely for you all to be back in this room by 1:01 p.m. I know, that's real special. 1:01 p.m. because we want to get started on time. So what time are you going to be back? Okay, all right, thank you. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. Appreciate everybody coming back in and taking their seats. We got a little bit of extra time to socialize and love on each other. Appreciate the fellowship. And I hope you all connected with someone new or that you didn't know coming in the room. All right, I think we are waiting for my signal. Okay. Wait 1 more minute. How was lunch? Yeah. I know I appreciate being fed. Good. Okay. Well, welcome back in person and live stream participants again to the first ever White House Summit on Environmental Justice in Action. I knew I was missing a word. And, you know, again, it has been, I hope, a morning of learning, a morning of celebrating, and a morning of being inspired. And we're going to continue that. And so, without further ado, it is my honor and privilege to introduce to some the matriarch, one of the many matriarchs of the environmental justice movement, Dr. Beverly Wright. She is founder and executive director of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice for the past 30 plus years. Again, woman founded, woman led, and just a voice. And so Dr. Wright is going to offer us some reflections and get us back in the spirit as we move throughout the day. So Dr. Wright, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Jelon. I've gotten my instructions, y'all. I have like 3 minutes. So I promised them that I could do it, that I would do less talking. I have 20 slides, but they move really quickly. Because these slides are mostly for you to visualize and to remember. So I'm going to take you through that. But I do want to start. Let's see if I press the right button. Yes. I had to start here, y'all. For those of you who don't know, this is Dr. Bunyan Bryan, who along with Paul Mohai convened what was called the Michigan Group. He passed away just recently and we're very saddened by that. But almost every African American who had a degree in environmental science at one point in time got that degree through Bunyan Bryan. Bunyan Bryan was also responsible for the beginning of our true interaction with EPA, the organization we love to hate. Over the last 40 years, it has been the one that we love to hate. So our best enemies and our best friends were in EPA. And we fought them for years and years and years. And I have to tell you, this is the first time in 30 years I've really felt like we have an inroad into that organization. And of course, my governor, the Confederate governor of Louisiana, actually did a FOIA on DSEJ and other small groups because he said we were too close to EPA. He needed to find out what in the world we were telling EPA. And he felt that EPA was following our dictates. I said, oh, so very wrong. If EPA were following our dictates, Cancer Alley wouldn't be Cancer Alley anymore. It would be a beautiful place for us to live, play, love, have children, all of those things. So very quickly, I want to take you through this. I couldn't do anything without recognizing Bunyan Bryan. And here's the Michigan Group, y'all. If you can find me and Bullet on there, you got good eyes. We were very young. In fact, I looked it up. I was 44 years old. I see that hair. You see that hair? Yes. And I'm standing right next to Bunyan. But at this first meeting, one of the results of that meeting, and we worked from day until night. He didn't give us breaks. You know, you just had to run to pee and rush right back. That's the way he did it. We came up with recommendations for actually developing environmental justice centers. And there was a petition, a request to meet with EPA. And 1 year later, we finally got that meeting. But very quickly, I'm going to take you through what happened. You've heard a lot about this. From the steps of the Capitol to in the Oval Office is where we have gone over these last 30-some years. That was the first People of Color Summit. What came out of that was 1991, the National Minority Environmental Health Conference, 92, EPA Equity Report, 93, the EPA creates NEJAC, 94, we had the first Health and Research Symposium, 94 as well, the executive order. You remember that? I think we had a ice in or snow in or something. Snowstorm. But we made it in, and I'm in that picture. I got pushed aside, and all you can see, literally pushed aside. There's a backstory to all of this. If I had time, y'all, I'd have y'all rolling laugh. We don't have time for the backstory. But I was pushed aside, so all you see is my hair, and poor Bernice is invisible. She's so short you can't see her at all. But we are in that picture. And then, you saw how many years that was from 1990 to 1994? After that, some things happened, but with my short period of time, not worth mentioning, we go straight to the current federal response. So in 2021, but watch this, folks, in 2021, we get the executive order, and all of these things happen. You all know the screening tool, all of these things we're doing. 2021, we have the Justice Party Initiative. 2022, Inflation Reduction Act. 2022, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. 2022, EPA creates the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. An amazing accomplishment. We just got that a 50-year case is now going forward on Devil Swamp out of Louisiana. 50 years we've been appealing that. This is the first time it's come forward, mostly because of this office. 2023, he signs the executive order. 2023, we get the Driving Communities Technical Assistance Center, which Deep South Center is proudly to say we have one. And what came after that was the TCGM. I didn't have time, y'all. They told me I only had 3 minutes. So I couldn't put everything up here. But this is the point. Then in 2024, the HAN rule, an amazing rule that would reduce cancer risk in Cancer Alley, I'm talking about where I live, by 90+%. We've never, ever, ever had any rule imposed that would really reduce cancer risk in Cancer Alley. We are third in the nation for cancer, and it's just an 85-mile stretch of land. And that was the signing of that. And, of course, in 2024, the first ever national goal of zero emissions through the freight sector set. And I did this so you could see it. So if you look at where we began in 1990 to 1994, then there's a big lull, yo. Then Biden-Harris comes in to play, right? And in 3 years, you know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I need not say any more. And the point is, I need an intern to work with me to complete this timeline. There's so many other things that are not up here. These are just the things that are the really big things. But the other kinds of rule changes that are being put in place, I mean, it's like Bernice said, every day. We go from the 90s to now to get to a point where we really see environmental justice embedded, institutionalized to some extent. But the fight is almost fiercer now than what it was when we first started. The reason is we're making progress. So whenever you start to make progress, the dogs come out. And they are out, but guess what? I'm 76 years old, and I've never been more inspired to work. Harder. Harder. We are going to win this fight. We are going to win this fight. I'm going to be a grandmother for the first time. I want this world to be better for my grandchild. So I am pleased, I'm happy to see all of you here. It's so wonderful to see those of you who have been with us from the very beginning. And look, you look damn good to be the age we are. I'm just going to tell you. We can't tell you how old we are. You can't tell by looking at us, I can tell you that, right? This is what hard work with a cause will do for you. It'll keep you here, right? It will keep you here because you have a cause. It's in your heart. We should fight harder than ever and ever, and I have so much more hope for the future than what I ever had. I don't mind fighting. I had a young person tell me, "Oh, I'm just so tired." I'm like, "Tired? You're 23. How can you be tired?" I couldn't believe it. So we really need to talk to our young people. Yes, I would like to spend more time with my soon-to-be grandchild. Yes, I want to go to the beach, but I'm not going till I'm sure you're ready. And there'll be no pushing out here. Enough said, but there'll be no pushing out. When we leave, we will leave because you are ready. We're ready to go, but are you ready? You know, to step in our shoes. So it takes heart, it takes conviction, it takes prayers. And for somebody like me, God is still working on me. You know, because I can get out of line, as they know, but I'm still working on that. I'm just saying, I am so happy to be here. The Harris administration, and you know what we're hoping for. They say we can't say it. We're not partisan. But you know, I just want to say power to women. Power to women. That's right. If you want to get something done, you do what? You give it to a woman. I'm going to end there. Thank you very much. I love all of you. Jalan, you have been magnificent in this job. I just want to say that. Really. You have been magnificent, and we hope to see this train continue in this direction. Thank you, folks.
I don't even know what to say, Dr. Wright. First of all, I feel bad about the time. She said about 10 times, but what I will say, it's how you use your time, not how much you have. And you used your time effectively, powerfully, and you inspired us, as always. So,
give me 30 minutes next time.
Next time. 30 minutes and 117 slides. Okay. All right, we're going to keep it going. Like I said, I tell you, so many, what'd you say, Maria? Yeah. So many milestones that folks have touched on, from Warren County to the summits to everything. And so we want to keep it moving with our second panel that is really going to dig into how folks are building healthier communities. Again, looking at the progress, the foundation, the infrastructure that the Biden-Harris administration has laid. So without further ado, I would love to call up our panelists at this time. So Ms. Donnell Wilkins is the Chief Executive Officer of the Green Door Initiative from Detroit, Michigan. We have Maria Lopez Nunez, who is the Deputy Director for Organizing and Advocacy at Ironbound in Newark, New Jersey. Yes. Mr. Jerome Shabazz, the Executive Director of the Overbrook Environmental Education Center, representing Philly, Pennsylvania. And Ms. Almeda Cooper, again, National Manager, Health Equity, Moms Clean Air Force here in Washington, D.C. So let's give them some love. So this second panel, again, is going to talk about progress in building healthy communities. And what I will say, when I travel across this country and have the opportunity to connect with folks in community, the one question that I always get is, you know, is this administration making a difference? And to take some of the words of, or borrow some of the words of Richard Moore, you know, when am I going to see, feel, hear, and taste a difference? You know, the billions of dollars is great, but what, right? And so we have 4 panelists that are going to share, again, some of the ways in which this administration is helping support, enhance, and expand their efforts around advocacy and building community health. So we are going to jump right in. And so my first question is for Ms. Donnell. Again, when you think about this administration and how they've worked to empower youth, particularly through, for example, the American Climate Corps training up thousands of youth to take on the climate challenge, and knowing the depth and the beauty of your work in Detroit, working with youth, you know, what does this mean when you talk about kind of this alignment and need for bringing youth into this space, whether it's green jobs, clean energy, the work that you're doing at the Green Door Initiative? What does it mean for this administration to kind of honor and empower youth to dig into this work?
Thank you. I will say that from the inception of the Green Door Initiative in Detroit, we have focused on youth, but there's rarely been an investment to help us meet the needs in our community around developing youth leadership. I've always believed that there needs to be a healthy transition of new leadership coming in. As Dr. Wright said, we're not always going to be here in this role, and we need to know that we have some safety and confidence in who's coming behind us. That's our role. But resources are needed to make it happen. And this administration, by far, has done the most to work with communities to ensure that there is a trajectory of young people coming into the work. One, just investing in the Climate Corps and helping young people understand that they have a role to see this through, and to have the support to be able to come in and work with communities so they can learn what that means, right? And then be able to get their own ideas and their own passion around this to make things happen for the future. So we have started, you know, we've seen the legacies, and we've been in that space. And even as young people, I like to say when I was at the first People of Color Summit, I was young, and I was tapped by Dr. Bunyan Bryan. I wouldn't be here if it were not for him, recognizing that this young person had something to give to the process. And here I am over 30 years later, making an impact. And I see the same responsibility for the people that I serve in my community in Detroit. We place the world on wheels. We have legacy pollution. We are dealing with the impacts of climate, like most of you, if not all of you in this room. We are dealing with a number of things, but we need strategies. And so as we put strategies around workforce development, because I came to the point, like, I'm tired of seeing other people who don't live in our communities and stuff gainfully employed, benefiting, and our people are not. They're watching on the sidelines. How does this administration help to impact that and influence that? Invest. And when you invest in the people, then we can ensure that there are jobs and opportunities, and we've been able to do that. Thanks for the partnerships, like with the Deep South Center, and the Bullard Center, and all of that, helping us really put our you know, put the foot on the pedal for workforce development. We've trained nearly 1,600 individuals from our community. We provide an annual summer employment program where 20 youth are on our payroll, getting paid to learn about all of this, right? And it is our hope and intention that when they get through the work that they get to do in natural resources or whatever, renewable energy and all of that during the summer, they begin to think about, well, what my future gonna look like? How am I gonna contribute to this? And if I can get 10% of those young people to say, I wanna do what you do, I want to go and be, you know, and focus maybe on law, but environmental law. Maybe I want to focus on science, and now science is kind of fun in terms of climate change, right? So maybe it's science, maybe it's medical, you know, opportunities or whatever. But we get to help to expand their thinking, expand their hope and vision so that they can be a part of this. They deserve to be a part of this. And it's our responsibility to hold folks accountable to make sure those resources get to where they belong and not just do, sit at it based on whatever the mayor or somebody else want to see happen with it, right? We got to be that, and we got to be that example. So it is marvelous in my sight, and it is marvelous to be able to participate in building that capacity and leadership among the young people in my community.
Awesome. Thank you, Donnell. Now, Maria, for those of you that may not know, I've had the opportunity over the past couple of years to get to see Maria in action. And one of the things that I admire about her is that she is able to unify folks. Even when there's disparate views or perspectives in the room, she does it tactfully. She's smart, takes no junk, but again, she is amazing. And I think what's also amazing is that she is a coalition builder. And so her work and what she's known for is being an advocate, not only in Jersey, but across this country and working with larger coalitions. And so, Maria, my question for you, again, in terms of coalition building, when you think about all the rules, air rules, toxins rules, all the regulations that are coming down, what does that mean for your work and your coalition building? Particularly, again, that this administration has set forth, very wonderful visual display by Dr. Wright. What does that mean to your work, Maria?
Yeah, those PowerPoints helped, right? No, thank y'all. I just want to say first, being in this room is exciting, right? Being in a room that's about environmental justice and actually looking into the audience and seeing environmental justice leaders from across the country, folks whose work I know and respect, that means everything. And when I think about the rules of this administration, I think about the folks in it. And I want to talk to agency folks, right? Because I've seen community leaders be brave. And I think we need the administration to be brave in these final months. We don't know what's coming next. It could potentially be exciting. It could potentially be devastating. But we need to make sure we're throwing resources out the window. Now is not the time to hold back. And I can see how the Supreme Court has put a dark cloud. But we need to be bold in this moment, as bold as possible. Because even if a rule is going to be challenged, it's going to take a while to work through the courts. And when the federal government sets a standard, it's a standard that's followed by the states, by local municipalities. And our community leaders take the cues of what has happened at the federal level, especially in the most vulnerable states that don't have that chance at the state level, and then they help push at the local level. So really, it is up to the folks in the administration right now to be as brave as the communities that you serve have shown you to be brave. And then real quick, I'll talk about Ironbound, right? I come from a community that is 4 square miles, and we got 3 power plants. Okay, we got the largest garbage incinerator, the largest sewage waste treatment facility. We're fighting a 4th power plant right now. I'm surrounded by the longest Superfund site in the country where Agent Orange was produced and then the dioxin was being dumped into the river. So when I think about these rules and regulations of the administration, I have to keep track of Lord knows how many. And I ain't no doctor, I ain't no scientist. I'm a regular ass person who has had to learn things. I have had to learn things. So I'm perfectly aware of what's at stake and how difficult it is. And I can see, our community has done the job of educating themselves and has done the job of advocacy. And I'm very happy to see the federal government finally putting in that work. And I would love to see that work continue on, Hopelessness, I think, is the tool of the oppressor. And I do think that it is our job here collectively in this room to spread hope about what's to come and what has been done.
Thanks, Maria, Mr. Shabazz. So again, this administration has put forth a lot of resources, particularly around building capacity for organizations and technical assistance. Something that Administrator Regan spoke about, the TIC tax, right? So Can you speak to the importance of technical assistance in advancing environmental justice and how you've seen that support provide the impetus for your work?
Well, thank you, Dr. J. Now I have two famous Dr. J's. You know, I'm from Philadelphia, PA. So we have the Dr. Julius Irving. But no, thank you very much for the question. You know, I'm fortunate enough to be a part of a Region 3's TIC-TAC, which is headed by our good colleague over here, Adrian Hallis, and where's Dr. Sakobi Wilson. So one of the benefits that's not talked about as often, beyond the money, is the natural structure that's being created. It's a brilliant structure. I think the Secretary talked about, Secretary Regan talked about 160 partnerships were created. And those collaborative partnerships are extraordinary, particularly when you're talking about under-resourced communities having access to these dollars. The idea that there's this extraordinary legacy amount of spending does not resonate with the common people on the street, the frontline communities, those people who are under-resourced that we talk about all the time. They don't understand what that means if they don't have access to it. But I think the technical assistance, what it does in its design, is to create a social architecture because it requires co-production of results that includes community members. Now that's a brilliant concept because when we talk to our academic partners, we can be the lead and they're still trying to talk to us as if we're not. But we say, wait a minute, we're the PI on this project. So therefore, we have to have a different kind of conversation. So that level of inspiration to the community is one of the things that this administration has created by way of its design. People are now becoming inspired because they're at least a part of the conversation, so the outcomes will reflect what's happening in communities, what's happening in neighborhoods, what's happening in frontline organizations. So I think what we need to be able to do is to not only just leverage the dollars and cents, but leverage the motivation that comes by way of inclusion. Because when we think about this environmental justice work, it's a healing and liberation science, right? We're healing communities that have been torn apart because roadways have been put between it, right? We're looking at communities that's overburdened by chemical burdens. And now we're giving them an opportunity to see that intersectionality of the work because it's not just a singular thing. If you're talking to a non-academic, you have to talk about those things where it's a value proposition relative to their lives. So now we're talking about the intersectionality of it. We're talking about health. We're talking about environment. We're talking about community and how all of those things are interrelated and how you play an extraordinary part because your life experience is the most invaluable asset to understanding how we go about creating a solution. So I think the technical assistance model gives us the framework. It's woefully underfunded, but it's a lot of opportunity to get started. So when we think about Region 3, for example, having $12 million, by the time it gets to the communities, we have the framework. The point being is that there's still a lot of work to be done. With this extraordinary model, with this extraordinary opportunity, we can't rest on our laurels. We have to realize that we're just getting started. We're creating the new language where we're lifting up the environmental literacy of regular people. We have common folks now thinking about lead in their paint, lead in their water, lead in their soil. They're looking at these environmental impacts in a different kind of way. And I think that's a result of this technical assistance, these conversations that we're creating, and this opportunity for people to realize there's somebody that I can go to in my community that looks like me who can give me a straight answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Jerome. So, Ms. Cooper, when I think about Mom's Clean Air Force, I remember probably 15 years ago where I brought both of my daughters to one of your play-ins, again, advocating, speaking with the EPA administrator at that time about the importance of clean air and regulations. And again, with this administration's multiple announcements, but the most recent one on extreme heat, how are these rules and regulations, again, for your work, kind of galvanizing moms and children across the country, how is that having a positive impact on the ground? Like, what does that really mean?
Well, first of all, I just thank you for participating in the play-in, and we happen to have just had another play-in yesterday. So what we do at Moms Clean Air Force, we're 1.5 million moms, dads, and caregivers, and we're united around clean air and children's health. So what we try to push out, and I think we're pretty effective at it, both in all forms of social media and in any way we can get our message out, is that we want to have our members and the people in their communities have access to reliable information and reliable solutions. So our mantra is like, take action. And yesterday in the play-in that I was just mentioning, Representative Jennifer McClellan introduced a resolution in Congress about children and extreme weather, because as we know, children are not little adults. They have higher respirations. They're closer to literally closer to the ground. They are taking in, more bad pollution than adults are. So also we know that their bodies are more affected by extreme heat. So what we are trying to do, and we partnered with Representative McClellan, is to make sure that as many people as possible know about these impacts. A lot of times when I talk to people, and I'm the National Manager for Health Equity at Moms Clean Air Force, but a lot of times when I talk to people and I tell them things about how children and how adults are impacted by extreme weather, they really don't know. Outdoor workers it's like 35 times more likely to die from an extreme heat event. Heat exhaustion, heat illness, heat stroke. And one of the things that this administration has done is proposed through OSHA to have rules to give some relief to outdoor workers. And many outdoor workers are women. I mean, there are a lot of men who are outdoor workers, but farm workers, for example, it's become a feminization of farm workers. More women are in the fields, and women, especially pregnant women, are disproportionately impacted by extreme heat. So when we are trying to get our message out and we're trying to let people know about these kinds of impacts in terms of extreme heat and extreme weather, is that you have to really get people to understand the magnitude of the impact. And there's millions of workers who are outdoor workers. And it's not just farm workers, construction workers, outdoor maintenance workers, outdoor vendors. In the city of Los Angeles, for example, so about 80% of the people who are street vendors are women. People just don't think about these things. And for any of you, I live in Washington, D.C., and if you've been walking around outside lately, it's very hot and it's humid and it's difficult. And just imagine if we were not sitting in this air-conditioned room right now, what it would be like for us as we were trying to have this meeting. And think about if you were doing some kind of hard labor or strenuous work. So health and climate go together. A lot of people don't know that, but we really try to impact, and we want people to know that climate solutions and health solutions go together, and extreme weather we have got to take action to do something about how it's impacting us.
Thank you so much. So important. And we're going to move to our last question, and I'm going to ask the panelists in a minute or less to think about 10 years from now. What do you think, or what do you hope the impact of this administration will be? What will be different? How will we feel differently in the communities where we come from, where we advocate from? What is it going to look like 10 years from now? And so I'll start again with Ms. Donnell.
When I think about 10 years from now, I think about the groundwork that we're doing with resources that started with the Department of Energy because of this administration, where we've decided that we need to make certain that renewable energy, solar, and those things are available to everyone, regardless of race, income, and zip code. And so our Motor City to Solar City project is intended to do that. So 10 years from now, the neighborhood that we've chosen to invest in with our vision will be fully functioning and thriving. There will be houses that are available, homes that poor and underrepresented individuals are occupying with all the bells and whistles for renewable energy, so that the burden of energy is not so much that they end up without homes. We envision small businesses, the barber shop, the funeral, and all that is a part of the main street there to actually be tapped into the renewable energy. We are taking a brownfield site, a school that's been shuttered for nearly 20 years, an elementary school, that will be the hub, the energy hub, with microgrids and all the things, and it will be a destination place that others will replicate. So I envision 2 or 3 other neighborhoods replicating what we are doing so that everyone has access to this kind of resource. That's what I see in employment at all levels, in terms of folks returning back from being just as involved and having a place to be. They are the people we train, young people in their early stages of their careers, contributing and benefiting. And it will be like what it's supposed to be.
Awesome, thank you. Beautiful vision. Maria.
What's going through my mind is just like, let's get real, people. We've missed the mark already on some of the clear markers for climate change. And so in 10 years, we'll be having to deal with that. And so the foundation that we're laying today amongst communities, I mean, I hope the federal government moves all the way in following EPA's example of having community-led grants, right? Like having communities be able to have that direct relationship with their federal government, I think is important, and we're going to need more of that, because we're going to have to stick together in an era of climate change and mitigating the harm that's going to come from the damage we've already caused. Hopefully in 10 years we can say we stopped here and we didn't keep going. And obviously how we, our actions in November will determine if we stop here or we keep going. And so in 10 years, I think we're laying the footprint right now in these next few months of what happens in the next 10 years. And I don't want to just pretend that it'll be rosy in 10 years, because we have a lot of cleaning up to do, work that we just started now. And so I'm hoping that this administration's legacy becomes cemented in the next couple of months, and that then we continue it, because it's a long road ahead of us. It's a generational road of work. As we've already seen, I'm really proud and honor all the ancestors that have come before us and all the elders that are still with us, and then all that work we have to do for that future.
Thank you, Maria. How powerful. Jerome, what you thinking about?
I'm thinking about the emergence of a new normal. We have to get to a point where the people who are most affected by this derogatory condition that we see all the time, they don't see that this environmentalism is just for the elite. They see it as part of their right as human beings to be able to drink water and not get sick, to breathe air and not get sick, and to be able to eat food that isn't poison before you get it in your mouth. We have to understand that there's a community that's looking for that kind of leadership, and I think it's in motion. 10 years from now, we should be able to see the culmination of that. We should see the culmination of the process of how people engage in these experiences, where they realize that when they're advocating in their local governments, that they should have a right, that no infrastructure should be developed without seeing the impact on people's lives. Your right to informed consent is part of your human right. So we should not be able to have a situation, even setting the framework for a situation, where industries and governments and other agencies are able to operate within communities with impunity without referring to those communities, because those people are going to be affected by it and they need a right of response. And I think 10 years from now, we're setting the motion for all of that to be a reality. We're setting in motion a situation where people are just not responding to disruptive events. that we're planning for those disruptive events, and that we know what it looks like to have a corrective mechanism in place. So oftentimes we only look at the disruptive experience, but we know these things are happening. And I think part of what we're doing now is allowing for communities to realize that this is a process, and that we're developing a process that enables them to have success over their future, over their lives, over their families. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm actually excited by the prospect of seeing people who are not in this work getting into this work. People who once wonder, why am I getting so much hypertension? You know, I go in a classroom and I ask people about the environmental issues. You may not get people to raise their hand. You ask them about PFAS and PFOA. They may not know about cumulative impacts. But if you ask them about hypertension, they raise their hand. You ask them about heart disease, they raise their hand. You ask them about diabetes, they raise their hand, because that's affecting their lives. But what if we began to make that message clear, that these environmental conditions are impacting your health, impacting your quality of life, and if you improve the quality of the environment, you improve the quality of your life as well. I'm hopeful that in 10 years from now, that message is clear, and that message is commonly understood amongst the people that we want to serve.
Awesome. Thank you. Ms. Almeida.
I think it's been alluded to before that the work that we're doing, it's, you know, hopefully we're going to continue to make great progress, but it's a complicated process, and we can't just think that if we do this one thing, it's going to be resolved. It's like the people, like Dr. Wright talked about, she's been doing this work a long time. We've got to continue to do it, continue to build the momentum. It's what you related to. We have to make sure that people understand the relationship between climate and their health, regardless of their zip code. That is just, that is super important. And we have to keep pushing out the facts. I mean, so many people don't know that 100,000 people a year in this country die because of air pollution. All of those facts are important, and we have to use, as you suggested, we have to use language that's really accessible. In February of this year, when the EPA passed an improved standard on the soot pollution, which is so dangerous for anybody who's living close to a power plant, an industrial plant, a landfill, or whatever. That's really important. They may not know what PM 2.5 is, but they understand what soot pollution is, and when you can explain to them that it goes into your bloodstream and into your lungs and is 1/30th the size of a human hair, people get that. So we have got to continue to make sure that we understand, no matter who is, hopefully we're going to have a good result in November, but just like in the past, there wasn't always the favorable administration, is work that has to be done, and on the grassroots level, we've got to be doing that, and that's what we're going to be doing at Moms Clean Air Force.
Thank you. So just a little bit of what we heard. Continuing investing in youth, having hope. This administration needs to be brave. We need to leverage the motivation that comes from inclusion. Don't forget those that are invisible. And I'll just say very quickly, without vision, the people will perish. So let's make sure that our vision is clear. Thank you, Almeida, Donnell, Maria, and Jerome, for a fabulous conversation. All right. So again, so excited to introduce, as we come to a close, two folks working really hard internally and externally on advancing the president's agenda. So I want to bring up at this time Mr. John Podesta, again, who has been such a leader in the president's domestic and international climate agenda, and just has been a wonderful supporter I know from my boss and this environmental justice work. So thank you, John.
Well, welcome to, it's no longer welcome in here all day, but thanks for being in the White House. And I want to thank Jalon and I want to thank Brenda and Nani for all the work they've done pulling the summit together and the work they do each and every day to make sure we stay on track. We keep producing on the environmental justice agenda, and that the deliverables that you heard about today, the new announcements, the announcements that will be made today, tomorrow, and the next day stay on track. Every single one of you, of course, has dedicated your lives to this critical work. Many of you have been in the trenches for decades. It's been an honor of mine to work with you, and I only wish I had been here all day. I was getting pulled in 7 different directions today. But we've spent a lot of hours together trying to understand better and hear the voices of communities. The people in this room made environmental justice a national issue, shining a spotlight on communities that have borne the brunt of industrial and power sector pollution, from the streets of the Bronx to the bayous of Louisiana, and from the native lands of Arizona to the neighborhoods of Miami. You have borne witness to environmental injustice, and you have delivered for your community. So thank you again on behalf of our administration, and particularly on behalf of the President and the Vice President. And all the while, you really, and I say this sincerely, you forged a movement so powerful that it became a mandate of the White House and for the entire federal government. We have finally have an environmental justice executive order, and I'm kind of old. I was around for the Clinton executive order, but we finally have an executive order that covers every federal agency and makes sure that every federal leader is focused on this question. That's because of you, not because of us. And I mean that. For the past 3.5 years, President Biden and Vice President Harris have worked hard to deliver on the mandate that you helped build. They passed the largest investment in climate and environmental justice in history, the Inflation Reduction Act. Embedded within it are $118 billion of grant programs covered under the Justice 40 initiative. Programs like and I'm sure you've been talking about this today, but programs like the $27 billion Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and the $4.3 billion in climate pollution reduction grants that EPA announced just earlier this week. They're putting communities in the driver's seat and on the road to their own clean energy future. A new design so that the people on the ground can design the programs that are going to work in those communities. Consumer-facing programs like tax credits and rebates for technologies like heat pumps and rooftop solar are saving Americans money on their utility bills. The Department of Transportation's Neighborhood Access and Equity Program is righting past wrongs where communities were damaged by transportation and infrastructure decisions that divided communities. Now we're trying to stitch them back together. And initiatives like the Methane Emissions Reduction Program and the Clean Ports Program that'll slash local pollution across the country. On top of that, the law's clean energy business tax credits are already funding new investment to underserved communities. According to March analysis by the Treasury Department, 75% of clean energy investments since the IRA have been in counties with lower than the median income. That was by design. That wasn't by accident. Business bonuses to locate clean energy projects in disadvantaged and traditional energy communities are making a big difference into where that private sector money is flowing. Plus, nonprofits, local governments, and other non-taxable entities are able to benefit from clean energy tax credits for the first time because of the IRA's pay provisions. And we know our work's not over. We got a lot to do. In implementing what we've already done, but also moving forward. And we won't rest until every community in America feels the impacts of our investments, until every child in America breathes clean air and drinks clean water until we not only right the wrongs of the past, but make sure that communities that have borne in the past the brunt of pollution are at the front of the line for new opportunity. That's a long path, and you've already been walking it for a long time, and our administration is committed to walking alongside you to get the job done. So thanks for being here today. Thanks for inspiring the work of this administration, and we're committed to being good partners with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And so to close us out, Mr. Richard Moore, again, co-founder, co-executive director of Los Latinas Institute in Albuquerque, New Mexico, fabulous dynamic co-chair of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, but despite all the titles, he is a good person. I tell him, reminds me of my grandfather, kind and sweet, but he will get on you if something's not right. And so, Mr. Richard, thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your honesty and transparency in pushing this administration. And I thank you for sharing your wisdom with me when I need it the most. So the floor is yours, Mr. Richard Moore.
You know, when I was coming in on the plane yesterday, you know, I looked out and I saw some things that reminded me of a couple things. And I want to, in these words, remind us at the same time. So when I was coming in, I looked out the window and I saw the Lincoln Monument. And what it reminded me of was the first call for the Poor People's Mobilization in Washington, D.C. that was called by Dr. Martin Luther King. And for those that don't remember, or in some cases was before the time, that's where many of our sisters and brothers from not only all over this country, but in other countries stayed, lived, worked, played, and studied together at the same time. That was Resurrection City, where many of us actually lived in for several months. I think the other thing that's real crucial for us to understand that, and as Dr. McLean reminds us many times, and she said to me, Richard, are you coming to Washington, D.C., to the White House as Frank, or are you coming as Richard? And it kind of reminded me of several things, because my mother told me at one time, son, we should have called you Frank, because you're going to be as Frank can be. Yeah. And I'm about to be a little bit of that Frank. So I just wanted to say, because you know I got to go back home. And if I go back home and I'm just Richard, I got a problem on my hands, okay? You know, but I sincerely just wanted to thank Dr. J, the chairwoman, all of you, all of our sisters and brothers, those that work in the federal government, those that work in state government. Let's not forget many of our sisters and brothers that are within state government too. Now, the card is going up, but I just have to remind you of a text message that I got. Secretary Reagan texted me, and he said, Richard, I think I made a mistake. And he said I was 1 minute short, but I was actually 2 minutes short, and I'm going to give you my 2 extra 2 minutes. So just in case, I just want to say. Okay, so here we go. You know, as many said, and you know, coming up, you know, being in this room together and just seeing the inspiration and the vibration and the energy that is in not only us in this room, but the hundreds of thousands of people that have been suffering by environmental racism, systemic racism in this country today. And I have to say, sisters and brothers, with all respect, in all of our families, and our family within the environmental and economic justice movement, we have some work to do, like everyone has some work to do. And that is to make the same commitment that we made in the Poor People's Campaign and at the first People of Color Leadership Summit. When we left Washington, D.C., we made a commitment and a promise to each other. And several of those were this. One was the establishment of the principles of environmental justice, and that needs to be very clear amongst us, the principles of environmental justice. The second one was the later thing about coming together with the Hemis principles for democratic organizing. Didn't necessarily take place at the first People of Color Summit, but came a little bit afterwards. But just going back for a minute together to the first People of Color Summit, that commitment that we made as African Americans, as Latinos, as Asian Pacific Islanders, of Native Indigenous people, and also the commitment that we made together, that we have to stay together. We need to stay unified. We got to stay strong, and we got to keep the pressure on the U.S. government. But at the same time, we have to thank this administration for doing what no other administration has done. I got to put that on the table, okay? There's been a lot. There's been a lot. But at the same time, we have to give credit where credit is due. We also say, and I saw the card, but I'm having problems because I left my glasses over there in that bag. It got a little blurry for a second. I couldn't do it. There would be no justice on the 40. Initially, we were talking about 40%. So who, in fact, then at the end of the day, said there should be some justice to the 40? You cannot talk about 40 without Justice 40, so there needs to be justice, some justice in the Justice 40 that implements and never forgets those sisters and brothers that have given up their lives to make it possible in those legacy environmental and economic justice communities for the rest of our lives. We have responsibility, and we need to live up to that responsibility. The other, if you remember history, I'm almost there. If you remember history, it was initially not the Office of Environmental Justice. Now, I'm a little bit younger. I got to be frank here about this, okay? You know, I'm a little bit younger than some of our elders. But what I will say is it was initially the Office of Environmental Equity. Does anybody remember that? Now, who said, if we talk about Justice 40, then who said, we're not talking about equity, we're not talking about equal distribution at that particular level of industry and of the military and all the other facilities, whether it be county, city, state, or federal government. We're not talking about equal distribution, we're talking about justice, okay? So then it became at the EPA, the Office of Environmental Justice, and the name, the Office of Environmental Equity, then was set to the side. So I just want to say in closing, but I will say this to anybody that knows me, knows as our young people say, he does it 3 times. He says in closing 3 times. And I just made the second one. Okay? So I want to say this. I know we're supposed to not say certain things, but I'm going to tell you something. I'm just going to remind you of something, okay? Now, this comment was made earlier to us, no? And it talked about the vice president. I just want to talk about that for a second, because when we look at the EJ for All bill, it was stated that she was one of the first ones, the first one, that signed on in her other capacity to that bill. Now, I'm going to tell you something. We're still about EJ for All. We are still about EJ for All, okay? So then, based upon that, let's not forget, and I am going to close this way because I really don't want to get us behind. And thank you. It's starting to get a little bit clearer, my vision. But when we arrived back on the Poor People's Campaign in Washington, D.C., and we went home, and the elders called us to the mountains of northern New Mexico, and they said, young sisters and brothers, with all respect, did you take that trip, those bus caravans to Washington, D.C. for your resume? Or did you realize just what happened in Washington, D.C. and before we got to D.C.? And so they invited us to a potato farm in northern New Mexico. And they said, young sisters and brothers, we invite you to northern New Mexico to work in the fields with us for several days. 3.5 days later, because you know, we also say on our own farm back in Albuquerque, New Mexico, that if you're going to come in and just come to visit and this kind of thing, work with us in the field, but talk while you're working. Don't lean your hand on the hoe or the shovel or anything else. Talk while you're working. So what they said was that I'm going to leave this with us. One, they said 3.5 days later, after crying together, after singing together, after thinking of the hundreds upon hundreds of years injustice that our people have faced, telling stories, celebrating, laughing, the music, the joking, and everything else 3.5 days later. And they said this: sisters and brothers, never forget for the rest of your life where you come from. Because place does matter. And they said also, always remember those that have given up their lives, and for whose shoulders you stand on. That makes it possible for you to be in these fields today, and the contribution that our sisters and brothers, whether they be in liberation movements, nonprofit organizations, whatever they may be, those sisters and brothers are family members that gave up their lives to make us possible to be in this Capitol today, to be in the White House. And then lastly, they said, always give back to others what's been given to you. That's what we're doing. We're giving back to what's been given to us. So let's work hard. Let's stand strong. Let's never forget where we come from. Let's never forget whose shoulders we stand on. And let's continue to give back to others what's been given to us. Stand strong, stand strong, stand strong. And we're going to make sure that for the rest of our lives and that generation that's coming behind us is that we do, so it's never said, that we allowed ourselves to be disrespected and throughout this period. So thank you, sisters and brothers. Thank you. Thank you, administration. We're here. We're going to keep on going, and we're going to stand strong together. United together, we will win. Thank you, Vincent Emmons.
If you all can't see on the live stream, you got a standing ovation. Again, thank you, Richard. My goodness, and John, for your closing remarks and call to action. We are going to move into our roundtables, but as we come to an end with the live stream portion of our time today, I just want to give some very brief closing remarks. I hope each of you in this room, at least the energy and the spirit I feel, is that you are leaving here not only more educated about what has been happening across this administration, not only more energized about the progress that has happened, more excited because of a connection you made eating outside or in here, or more encouraged to leave here and do more. My hope is that you don't keep what happened here to yourselves. Take it beyond this room, share it broadly. That's important. And at the top of our time together, someone said, we are only in this moment because of the many moments that happened before us, the many milestones. And I think it's important because these moments give us the momentum to keep this movement going. A movement that's not only external, but a movement that's internal and across our federal government. So let's embrace those milestones and moments, but make sure that it's giving us more momentum to keep on going. So again, the journey is not over. I have been reflecting, thinking about my EJ journey that started in high school and how this little brown girl from Detroit somehow is in the White House. And I know that is not by happenstance. And wherever you sit in this country, in this world, you know that where you are there for a purpose. And I would just ask you to take your power and privilege and your connections to ask the questions about policy and practice that isn't serving our communities. You have that power. You have an administration that has made it clear that this is a priority that's not going anywhere. So at the state government level, local government level, if you're a mom, an advocate, an academic, an educator, a nurse, whatever, you have power in whatever position you possess. So again, what I will say is thank you to each of you all that gave us advice in crafting this summit today. Thank you to those who took the time to share their voice and wisdom. Thank you to the members of our WEJAC, our Interagency Council that are in a watch party down the hall. Thank you to this administration. Thank you to Chair Mallory, our CEQ staff, all the staff, all of our policy teams. Thank you to my amazing Office of Environmental Justice. I have no words because you all are awesome. Thank you to our dynamic public engagement team, Dr. Rebecca and Shelby, who created and crafted this with the help of Emily from the start to the beginning. Shelby, don't you start crying. And I cannot not thank the person that brought me into this world, my mom, who was here and able to share in this space with me today. And my other family who was here, including my daughters and my stepdad and my little brother that flew in from LA that are watching in the other room. So again, I know you've been sitting for a while, but if you are physically able, we're going to go out how we came in, with a bang. So I'm going to ask you to stand up. And as we close out this live stream portion, I'm going to ask you to repeat after me 3 times. All right? I am environmental justice. In action. I am environmental justice. In action. I am environmental justice. In action. Let's get busy.